So we are in chapter 9, book 2. This chapter is picking up exactly where 7 and 8 picked up, left off. So the Marquis at the end of chapter 8 was on his way home. He arrives home at the end of 8. He's expecting someone named Monsieur Charles. Obviously, the only person that we know named Charles is Charles Darnay. So that's who he's expecting at his chateau. So chapter 9 is called The Gorgon's Head. There's a couple allusions to Greek mythology. This is one of them. So a Gorgon is like Medusa. Have you ever heard about her? So she had like the snakes in her hair. And she had the ability to turn people into stone. So a Gorgon is somebody who has the ability to turn someone else into stone. And you'll see why that chapter title is significant once we start reading. So it was a heavy, massive building, the chateau of Monsieur the Marquis, with a large stone courtyard before it, and 2 stone sweeps of staircase meeting in a stone terrace before the principal door. A stony business altogether, with heavy stone balustrades, and stone urns, and stone flowers, and stone faces of men, and stone heads of lions in all directions, as if the Gorgon's head had surveyed it when it was finished 2 centuries ago. This entire opening paragraph is just describing the Marquis's house. So everything about the Marquis's house is made of, obviously, stone. Think about what else is made of stone, though. Like, what do we know about him as a character, right? His heart is also made of stone. So he goes into the house. I'm going to skip a little bit, jump over to 115. Again, it's just describing, the interior of the home, stone, obviously, very luxurious. And jump on 115 to the second full paragraph. So it says, a supper table was laid for 2 in the third of the rooms, a round room in one of the chateau's 4 extinguisher topped towers. A small lofty room with its window wide open and wooden jalousie blinds closed, so that the dark night only showed in slight horizontal lines of black, alternating with their broad lines of stone color. My nephew, said Marquis, glancing at the supper preparation. They said he has not arrived. Okay, so we just found out the connection between the Marquis and Charles Darnay is that the Marquis is Darnay's uncle. So that's huge. So Darnay is actually from France, not from England. And remember, we knew that Darnay was actually an alias, and that was not his real name. Nor was he, but he had been expected with Monseigneur. It is not probable he will arrive tonight. Nevertheless, leave the table as it is. I shall be ready in a quarter of an hour. In a quarter of an hour, Monseigneur was ready and sat down alone to his sumptuous and choice supper. His chair was opposite to the window, and he had taken his soup and was raising his glass of Bordeaux to his lips when he put it down. What is that? He calmly asked, looking with attention at the horizontal lines of black and stone color. Have you ever been home alone, maybe? And at night, and had your blinds open or curtains open? What is that feeling, sort of? What's the eerie feeling is that there could be somebody outside your house that's looking in and you can't see them because you have the lights on. It's that kind of feeling. So he says, notice, Monseigneur, that, outside the blinds, open the blinds. It was done. Well, Monseigneur, it's nothing. The trees and the night are all that are here. The word is the Marquis feeling paranoid. Probably because of what he's done, the fact that there was somebody hanging on underneath his carriage, all of those things are, adding up a little bit for him. So the servant who spoke had thrown the blinds wide, had looked out into the vacant darkness, and stood, with that blank behind him, looking round for instructions. Good, said the imperturbable master. Close them again. That was done, too, and the Marquis went on with his supper. He was halfway through when he again stopped with his glass in his hand, hearing the sound of wheels. It came on briskly and came up to the front of the chateau. Ask who has arrived. It was the nephew of Monseigneur. He had been some few leagues behind Monseigneur early in the afternoon. He had diminished the distance rapidly, but not so rapidly as to come up with Monseigneur on the road. He had heard of Monseigneur at the posting houses as being before him. He was to be told, said Monseigneur, that supper awaited him then and there, and that he was prayed to come to it. In a little while he came. He had been known, think about the language of that, he had been known in England as Charles Darnay. Monsignor received him in a courtly manner, but they did not shake hands. So think about that too, right? Like when you go and see your family, a lot of people will hug or shake hands or something like that. There's none of that exchange between the two, which suggests that it's a little awkward between the two of them, or a little strained, their relationship. You left Paris yesterday, sir, he said to Monsignor as he took a seat at the table. Yesterday. And you? I come direct. From London? Yes. You have been a long time coming, said the Marquis with a smile. On the contrary, I come direct. Pardon me, I mean not a long time on the journey, long time intending the journey. I have been detained by, the nephew stopped a moment in his answer, various business. I lost my spot. Oh, without doubt, said the polished uncle. So long as a servant was present, no other words were passed between them. When coffee had been served and they were alone together, the nephew looked at the uncle and, meeting the eyes of the face that was like a fine mask, opened a conversation. So super awkward, dinner time conversation between the two of them. I've come back, sir, as you anticipate, pursuing the object that took me away. It carried me into great and unexpected peril. He's talking about the trial. But it had a sacred object, and if it carried me to death, I hope it would have sustained me. Not to death, said the uncle. It's not necessary to say to death. I doubt, sir, returned the nephew, whether it had carried me to the utmost brink of death, you would have cared to stop me there. The deepened marks in the nose and the lengthening of the fine straight lines in the cruel face looked ominous as to that, and the uncle made a graceful gesture of protest which was so clearly a slight form of good breeding that it was not reassuring. No, said the uncle pleasantly. But however that may be, resumed the nephew, glancing at him with deep distrust. That's how he feels about his uncle. I know that your diplomacy would stop me by any means and would know no scruple as to means. My friend, I told you so, said the uncle with a fine pulsation in the two marks. Do me a favor to recall what I told you so long ago. I recall it. Think about that word choice. Thank you, said the Marquis, very sweetly indeed. His tone lingered in the air, almost like the tone of a musical instrument. In effect, sir, pursued the nephew, I believe it to be at once your bad fortune and my good fortune that has kept me out of prison in France here. I do not quite understand, returned the uncle, sipping his coffee. Dare I ask you to explain? I believe that if you were not in disgrace with the court, and had not been overshadowed by that cloud for years past, a letter de cachet would have sent me to some fortress indefinitely. It is possible, said the uncle with great calmness, for the honor of the family. I could even resolve to incommode you to that extent. Pray excuse me. I perceive that, happily for me, the reception of the day, before yesterday, was as usual a cold one, observed the nephew. I would not say happily, my friend, returned the uncle with refined politeness. I would not be sure of that. A good opportunity for consideration, surrounding by the advantages of solitude, might influence your destiny to far greater advantage than you influence it for yourself. But it is useless to discuss the question. I am, as you say, at a disadvantage. These little instruments of correction, these gentle aids to the power and honor of families, these slight favors that might so incommode you, are only to be obtained now by interest and importunity. They are sought by so many, and they are granted comparatively to so few. It used to not be so, but France in all such things is changed for the worst. Our not remote ancestors held the right of life and death over the surrounding vulgar, talking about the peasants. From this room, many such dogs have been taken out to be hanged in the next room, my bedroom. One fellow, to our knowledge, was poignarded or stabbed with a sword on the spot for professing some insolent delicacy respecting his daughter. His daughter? We have lost many privileges. A new philosophy has become the mode, and the assertion of our station in these days might, I do not go so far as to say would, but might cause us real inconvenience. All very, very bad. So basically the Marquis is complaining about how things have changed and how they used to have so much more power than they do now, like for them presently. But also keep in mind he just killed a little boy and there's no consequence to that. So they still pretty much have free reign. But he's saying it used to be even more so. They had free reign to just kill the peasants if they wanted. The Marquis took a gentle little pinch of snuff and shook his head as elegantly despondent as he could, becomingly, of a country still containing himself, that great means of regeneration. We have so asserted our station, both in the old time and in the modern time also, said the nephew gloomily, that I believe our name to be more detested than any name in France. That is so important. If I was in class, I would write that down. Their name, whatever it is the most detested name in France. Everybody knows the name. So his title is the Marquis de something, and you'll find out what the name is a little bit later. But everybody in France knows the name, recognizes it, and so perhaps that's why Charles Darnay changed his name to not be associated with his family name. Let us hope so, said the uncle. Detestation of the high is the involuntary homage of the low. So the uncle's not fazed by the fact that people don't like him. There is not, pursued the nephew in his former tone, a face I can look at in all this country round about us which looks at me with any deference on it but the dark deference of fear and slavery. So their family name is synonymous with fear and slavery. A compliment, said the Marquis, to the grandeur of the family, merited by the manner in which the family has sustained its grandeur. Ha! And he took another little gentle pinch of snuff and lightly crossed his legs. But when his nephew, leaning an elbow on the table, covered his eyes thoughtfully and dejectedly with his hand, the fine mass looked at him sideways with a stronger concentration of keenness, closeness, and dislike than was comportable with its wearer's assumption of indifference. Repression is the only lasting philosophy. The dark deference of fear and slavery, my friend, observed the Marquis, will keep the dogs obedient to the whip, as long as this roof, looking up to it, shuts out the sky. So basically, he's happy as long as he can keep the peasants, kept down low, keep them the slaves. That's the thing that keeps him in his position. That might not be so long as the Marquis supposed. Also, a little moment of foreshadowing. If a picture of the chateau, as it was to be a very years hence, and 50 like it were to be a very few years hence, could have been shown to him that night, he might have been at a loss to claim his own from the ghastly fire-charred and plunder-wrecked ruins. So that's foreshadowing, or that's kind of like Dickens telling us something that's going to happen down the road. As for the roof, he vaunted, he might have found that shutting out the sky in a new way, to wit, forever, from the eyes of the bodies into which its lead was fired out of the barrels of 100,000 muskets. Thinking about the Revolution. Meanwhile, said the Marquis, I will preserve the honor and repose of the family if you will not. But you must be fatigued. Shall we terminate our conference for the night? A moment more. Ah, sir, or an hour, if you please. Sir, said the nephew, we have done wrong, and we are reaping the fruits of wrong. We have done wrong? Repeated the Marquis with an inquiring smile, and delicately pointing first to the nephew, then to himself. Our family, our honorable family, whose honor is of so much account to both of us in such different ways. Even in my father's time we did a world of wrong, injuring every human creature who came between us and our pleasure, whatever it was. Why need I speak of my father's time when it is equally yours? Can I separate my father's twin brother, joint inheritor, and next successor from himself? Huge. We just find out that the Marquis had a twin brother, and the twin brother was Darnay's father. Think about doubles, twins, duality, doppelgangers, all of that. Death has done that, said the Marquis. So Darnay's dad is dead. And has left me, answered the nephew, bound to a system that is frightful to me, responsible for it, but powerless in it, seeking to execute the last request of my dear mother's lips, and to obey the last look of my dear mother's eyes, which implored me to have mercy and to redress, and tortured by seeking assistance and power in vain. His mother's dying wish was that he do something different with his life. He make the sins of his uncle and his father right. We don't know what those are yet, but so his mother was good, his father was not. Seeking them from me, my nephew, said the Marquis, touching him on the breast with his forefinger. They were now standing by the hearth. You will forever seek them in vain, he assured. Every fine straight line in the clear whiteness of his face was cruelly, craftily, and closely compressed, talk about alliteration, and while he stood looking quietly at his nephew with his snuff box in his hand. Once again, he touched him on the breast as though his finger were the fine point of a small sword, so it's like he's stabbing him, with which, in delicate finesse, he ran through the body. He said, "My friend, I will die perpetuating the system under which I have lived." So the Marquis like, "I will never change. There's nothing that you can say to me that will make me be different than how I've always been." When he had said it, he took a culminating pinch of snuff and put his box in his pocket. "Better to be a rational creature," he added, "than, after ringing a small bell on the table, and accept your natural destiny. But you are lost, Monsieur Charles, I see." "This property in France are lost to me," said the nephew sadly. "I renounce them." Okay, so renounce means give up. He's saying, I don't want the money, the property, the land, the title, any of it. But pay attention, it's only he and the Marquis that are in this conversation, right? It's not like in a will or anything like that. He just says to his uncle, I don't want any of it. The name, the title, like I said, any of it. Are they both yours to renounce? France may be, but is the property? It is scarcely worth mentioning, but is it yet? I had no intention in the words I used to claim it yet, meaning like it's not his, it's the uncle's. He would only get it if something happened to the uncle. Hint, 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 hint. If it passed to me from you tomorrow, which I have vanity to hope is not probable, or 20 years hence, you do me too much honor, said the Marquis. Still, I would prefer the supposition. I would abandon it and live otherwise and elsewhere. It is little to relinquish what it is but a wilderness of misery and ruin. So he's saying, I would, if it were to become mine tomorrow, if something were to happen to you and you were to die, and it were to become mine tomorrow, I don't want any of it. "Ha," said the Marquis, glancing around the luxurious room. "To the eye it is fair enough here, but seen in its integrity under the sky and by the daylight, it is a crumbling tower of waste, mismanagement, extortion, debt, mortgage, oppression, hunger, nakedness, and suffering." So basically, Darnay calls out all the wrongdoings of the uncle. "Ha," said the Marquis again in a well-satisfied manner. "If it ever becomes mine, it shall be put in some hands better qualified to free it slowly, if such a thing is possible, from the weight that drags it down, so that the miserable people who cannot leave it, and who have been wrung to the last point of endurance, may, in another generation, suffer less. But it is not for me. There is a curse on it and all this land." So he says there's a curse. "And you," said the uncle, "forgive my curiosity. Do you, under your new philosophy, graciously intend to live? I must do to live what others of my countrymen, even with nobility at their backs, may have to do someday, work." So he's like, how are you going to make money? The way he's going to make money is obviously working. "In England, for example? Yes, the family honor, sir, is safe from me in this country. The family name can suffer from me and no other, for I bear it in no other." The ringing of the bell had caused the adjoining bedchamber to be lighted. It now shone brightly through the door of communication. The Marquis looked that way and listened for the retreating step of his valet. "England is very attractive to you, seeing how indifferently you've prospered there," he observed then, turning his calm face to his nephew with a smile. "I have already said that for my prospering there I am sensible I may be indebted to you, sir. For the rest, it is my refuge. They say, those boastful English, that it is the refuge of many. You know a compatriot who has found a refuge there? A doctor?" "Yes." "With a daughter?" "Yes." "Yes," said the Marquis. "You are fatigued. Good night." Pay attention to this. As he bent his head in his most courtly manner, there was a secrecy in his smiling face, and he conveyed an air of mystery in those words which struck the eyes and ears of his nephew forcibly. At the same time, the thin straight lines and the setting of the eyes and the thin straight lips and the markings in the nose curved with a sarcasm that looked handsomely diabolic. So, the Marquis brings up Lucy, brings up Dr. Manette, and he's smiling like as if he knows something, as if there's a secret. So there's something to all of this. "Yes," repeated the Marquis, "a doctor with a daughter. Yes, so commences the new philosophy. You are fatigued. Good night." But he doesn't say anything else, and then that's just the end of it. "Yes," repeated the Marquis, "a doctor with a daughter. Yes." Oh, sorry, I repeated that. It would have been of as much avail to interrogate any stone face outside the chateau as to interrogate that face of his. The nephew looked at him in vain in passing on to the door. "Good night," said the uncle. "I look to the pleasure of seeing you again in the morning. Good repose. Light monsieur my nephew to the chamber there, and burn monsieur my nephew in his bed if you will," meaning like light a candle, don't actually burn him. He added to himself before his little bell rang again and summoned his valet to his own bedroom. The valet come and gone, Monsieur the Marquis walked to and fro in his loose chamber robe to prepare himself gently for sleep, that hot still night. Rustling about the room, his softly slippered feet made no noise on the floor. He moved like a refined tiger looking for some enchanted marquis of the impenitently wicked sort in story whose periodical change into tiger form was either just going off or just coming on. He moved from end to end of his voluptuous bedroom, looking again at the scraps of the day's journey that came unbidden into his mind. He's thinking about everything that happened that day. It says, he's thinking about the fountain, suggested the Paris fountain, the little bundle lying on the step, the woman bending over it, and then the tall man with his arms up crying, "Dead." "I am cool now," said Monsieur the Marquis, "and may go to bed." So leaving only one light burning on the large hearth, he let his thin gauze curtains fall around him and heard the night break its silence with a long sigh as he composed himself to sleep. The stone faces on the outer walls stared blindly at the black night for 3 heavy hours. For 3 heavy hours the horses in the stables rattled at their racks, the dogs barked, and the owl made a noise with very little resemblance in it to the noise conventionally assigned to the owl by men poets. But it is the obstinate custom of such creatures hardly ever to say what is set down for them. For 3 heavy hours the stone faces of the chateau, lion and human, stared blindly at the night. Dead darkness lay on the landscape. Dead darkness added its own hush to the hushing dust on all the roads. The burial place had got to the pass with its little heap of poor grass where it was undistinguishable from one another. The figure of the cross might have come down for anything that could have been seen in it. So again, think about the imagery, like the dead and the dark and the night and all of that. Next paragraph it says, the fountain in the village flowed unseen and unheard, and the fountain at the chateau dropped unseen and unheard, both melting away, like the minutes that were falling from the spring of time, through 3 dark hours. Then the gray water of both began to be ghostly in the light, and the eyes of the stone faces of the chateau were opened. So now it's like starting to be day. Lighter and lighter, until at last the sun touched the tops of the still trees and poured its radiance over the hill. In the glow, the water of the chateau fountain seemed to turn to blood, and the stone faces crimson. So now, think about, in 8, the setting sun is causing red on the marquee, and now the rising sun is doing a similar thing to the gorgons, to the stone statues. The carol of the birds was loud and high, and on the weather-beaten sill of the great window of the bedchamber of Monsieur the Marquis, one little bird sang its sweetest song with all its might. At this, the nearest stone face seemed to stare amazed and with an open mouth, and dropped underjaw looked awe-stricken. Now the sun was full up, and the movement began in the village. Casement windows opened, crazy doors were unbarred, and people came forth shivering, chilled as yet by the new sweet air. Then began the rarely lighted toil of the day among the village population. Some to the fountain, some to the fields, men and women here to dig and delve, men and women there to see their poor livestock, and lead the bony cows out to such pasture as could be found by the roadside. In the church and at the cross, a kneeling figure or two, attendant on the latter prayers, the led cow, trying for the breakfast among the weeds at its foot. I can't breathe. The chateau awoke later, as became its quality, but awoke gradually and surely. First, the lonely boar spears and knives of the case had been reddened as of old, then had gleamed trenchant in the morning sunshine. Now doors and windows were thrown open, so everybody's waking up. Turn the page. All those trivial incidents belonged to the routine of life and the return of morning. Surely not so the ringing of the great bell of the chateau, nor the running up and down of the stairs, nor the hurried figures on the terrace, nor the booting and tramping here and there and everywhere, nor the quick saddling of horses and riding away. What winds conveyed this hurry to the grizzled mender of roads, already at work on the hilltop beyond the village with his day's dinner, not much to carry, lying in a bundle that it was worth no cow's while to peek at, on a heap of stones? Had the birds carrying some grains of it to a distance dropped one over him as they sow chance seeds? Whether or no, the mender of roads ran on the sultry morning as if for his life down the hill, knee-high in dust, and never stopped till he got to the fountain. All the people of the village were at the fountain, standing about in their depressed manner, and whispering low, but showing no other emotion than grim curiosity and surprise. The led cows, hastily brought in and tethered to anything that would hold them, were looking stupidly on, or lying down chewing the cud of nothing particularly repaying their trouble when they had picked up their interrupted saunter. Some of the people of the chateau, and some of those of the posting house, and all the taxing authorities were armed more or less, and were crowded on the other side of the little street in a purposeless way that was highly fraught with nothing. Already the mender of roads had penetrated into the midst of a group of 50 particular friends, and was smiting himself in the breast with his blue cap. What did all this portend, and what portended the swift hoisting up of Monsieur Gabelle behind a servant on horseback, and the conveying away of the said Gabelle, double laden though the horse was, at a gallop, like a new version of the German ballad of Leonora? It portended that there was one stone face too many up at the chateau. So all the people are at the fountain gossiping. The mender of roads comes down. He's like listening in. It says that there's one extra stone face up at the chateau. Think about whose stone face that is. So the Gorgon had surveyed the building again in the night, and had added the one stone face wanting, the stone face for which it had waited through about 200 years. It lay back on the pillow of Monsieur the Marquis. It was like a fine mask, suddenly startled, made angry and petrified. Driven home into the heart of the stone figure, attached to it was a knife. Round its hilt was a frill of paper on which was scrawled, "Drive him fast to his tomb, this from Jacques." So, Marquis dead. He's been killed. Think about who would have killed him. And he's stabbed in the heart, and attached to the knife is a note that says, "Drive him fast to his tomb." What does that mean? "This from Jacques." So why is it signed from Jacques? What is that supposed to mean? So the Marquis is dead. So all of that conversation that was happening with Darnay and renouncing the title, he was the only one in the room. He was the only one that, the Marquis was the only one that heard all of that. And now the Marquis is dead. So technically, who owns the land? Who technically is the new Marquis? So think about that.